took me going to a few places like in Pennsylvania and in Ohio, where I either had to go for for work or giving a talk at a college, and I drove around and I talked to the mayor, and what I discovered was the story in these places is not that these people's livelihood has disappeared, they are on the dole, they're in terrible straits. Of course, there are people like that, and J.D. Vance has made a career of describing in actually in very elegant terms what happened to Appalachia. But for the most part, and the data proves this, people still have jobs, they have new jobs, incomes have not gone down. The United States is at one of the lowest unemployment rates in the last 50 years. But what has happened is, the way I put it is their jobs, their livelihood didn't go away, but their lives went away. By which I mean, if you go to a place like Youngstown, Ohio, they all worked in the steel plant. The steel plant is gone. They probably went to Korea, if you want to put it metaphorically. They all worked together. They'd all go to church together. They'd all go to the bowling alley together. They'd all go to the Kiwanis Club together. They'd go to the hardware store together. There was a kind of community that had built around these industries and these factories. And that has all gone away. Now, much of it has gone away, not because of globalization. I mean, the reason they're not going to church as much is, there's been a broader secularization of society. The reason they don't go to the hardware store is because Home Depot has made these hardware stores unviable. The reason maybe they don't go to the movie theater is because of Netflix. The reason they don't go to the bowling alley is because the whole bunch of men now do online gaming. But that's all vague, abstract. It's much easier to put the blame on something much more tangible, and it became a kind of blame the elites, blame the immigrants, and that narrative is much more visceral. In my experience, people don't actually understand economics very well. But I hate to say this at a business school, but I can tell you from doing the show, it's like, if you were to actually poll people about what is the relationship between interest rates, inflation, they would have no idea. But what they do know is that their world is disappearing, and what they are susceptible to is the argument from somebody who says, I'm going to bring it back. The most important word in Trump's slogan is again. Make America great again, because it brings you back to some time when all this stuff wasn't happening. And the beauty of the slogan is you can each decide what that moment was when you were in the Garden of Eden. The most worrying part about this, and really probably the central worry, is why is the country not rebelling? Because this is part of what the Trump people are doing is to say, look, it can't be anything wrong with this because we're doing it out in the open. We are telling you we are doing this. We're celebrating these deals as we do them, right? So how can we're not being furtive about this.
And the stock market is roaring.
Right, but I look at that and say, yeah, you are being open about it, and why are people okay with this? Why are people not saying, why are people not rebelling? Why are people not saying, this is really unconscionable? That's the puzzle. The stock market is easier, as you know. It's a complicated. I've always been careful about making macroeconomic predictions in life because the macroeconomy, particularly an economy the size of the United States, 30 trillion, it's huge. And you're talking about 1,000 variable puzzle, right? And everybody will say, well, you do this one thing, tariffs, and it's going to have, who the hell knows, right? Because there are 46 other things happening at the same time. And so, for example, oil prices went from 90 to 60 in the last 6 months, or roughly. Who knows how much of an effect that had, on the plus side? And as everyone has pointed out, this AI spending is overwhelming everything. So it does seem like the underlying economy is much weaker. It does seem like the tariffs have added complexity and problems to it. But this AI spending is overwhelming everything. And who knows, it could go on for another 3 years. It could go on for another 3 months. And so I think that the danger people have made with regard to Trump is almost all the things he has done economically, particularly these externally, tariffs and such, have been bad. They've been bad for the economy. They're negative for economic growth. They're negative for low inflation. But it doesn't mean you'll produce an immediate crisis, right? Even the immigration stuff, the H-1B stuff, it's bad. We benefit from having high-skilled immigration. But will it cause a crisis tomorrow? No. What's more likely is it's a degradation of America's potential and growth. And that's the real, that's the challenge. It's the proverbial frog in the boiling water, which I know if there are scientists here, I know the frog would actually jump out. But we all, for some reason, use this metaphor because we have not been able to invent a better metaphor. But take something like trade. The most hopeful sign that has taken place in the last 6 months, in the last 3 months, is that when Trump declared his trade war, the European Union refused to go along. The European Union said, we're not going to, even though they had threatened retaliatory tariffs, when it happened, they didn't slap retaliatory tariffs on because they said, we don't want to punish our people. If the Americans make a foolish decision, we're not going to mirror that decision, and we don't want to start a global trade war. And if you look around the world, including Canada, people have been remarkably careful. This is the big difference between Smoot-Hawley and today. The reason Smoot-Hawley created so much of a kind of, such a global problem is that almost every country retaliated. And you got into a kind of upward ratcheting, which left the whole world in a kind of trade war. Now what's happened is most countries are doing what Mark Carney is doing, treating the US as the problem case that has to be dealt with on a kind of separate track. Meanwhile, actually trying to expand trade with the rest of the world, right? To find ways of actually lowering tariffs with Europe, with China, with India, with Latin America. The EU is doing exactly the same. While they're dealing with the US, they're actually signing a free trade deal with India. They're trying to do one with Latin America. And that tells you that, this is a very interesting moment where for the first time, I would say in 75 or 100 years, the United States is not controlling the master narrative of the world. The US has gone down this path of protectionism, of right-wing populism, but the rest of the world is searching for its own path. They're doing things that are different, and in many important ways, actually doing the opposite of what the United States is doing.